Hello, this message is for Sandra Eanhoff. If you're not Sandra Eanhoff, please do not listen to the rest of the message. I'll now pause for 3 seconds.
Andy paused for less than 2 seconds before continuing.
Miss Eanhoff, this message contains personal and private information, so you shouldn't listen where other people can hear the message. I'll pause for 3 more seconds.
He did so for 2, his eyes glued to the voicemail script lying on the desk in front of him.
My name is Andy Zemeckis, and I am a death collector with Satan and Associates. This is an attempt to collect a death, and any information gathered will be used for that purpose. It is very important we speak today, Miss Eanhoff. I'll be in the office until 9 all week. Please return my call at 1-666-666-6651, extension 4491. Have a great day.
Andy knew she wouldn't call back. Very few people ever did. He dispositioned the call on his computer as "machine, left message," and then his eyes scanned over the remarks on Sandra's account. This was the 5th call that Satan and Associates had made to her in the last week. If she didn't answer and pay her owed death by call number 6, he knew a manager would bring out the big guns. It was only a matter of time until bloody-fanged, winged imps were banging on her window to drag her down to hell. He felt sorry for the deathers he called to collect on, but he knew they had all agreed to sign the contract that had them owing a death in the first place. The account holders knew they would have to pay up eventually, but like most Americans, when they finally came to collect, they were nowhere to be found. Satan and Associates was the friendly way of telling the account holders that their time had come. Refusal to acknowledge their deaths would only increase interest, and a person who had been due for one of the less extreme circles of hell might find him or herself crunched between Satan's teeth for all eternity, should he or she choose to try and cheat the devil his due. One might think this would be a great disincentive for the deathers to run, but in general, they didn't seem to understand the true cost of such infractions. Before he could continue his thoughts, the next call came up on his screen. He had hoped this one would pay up without issue so he could hit his monthly quota, but knew that account members willing to pay their debts without a fight were few and far between. The call box identified the deather as Dr. Stanley Morris. His line patched in the second that a human voice answered the phone.
Hello?
Said a male voice, already sounding wary.
Stanley?
Replied Andy, hoping to catch the man off guard.
Who is this?
The unidentified voice questioned, starting to sound angry.
My name is Andy Zemeckis.
Andy replied, trying to sound patient.
I don't know anyone named Andy Zemeckis.
Mr. Morris, for your own protection, I need to verify your present address or the last 4 digits of your social security number,
he said, but he was interrupted before he could finish.
Listen, buddy, I don't know who you are.
At the start of the intended rant, Andy's eyes flashed to a post-it note attached to the top of his monitor.
Take control,
it read. He followed its advice, interrupting Dr. Morris with a voice that sounded less than friendly.
Mr. Morris,
Andy shouted, his voice overpowering that of the account holder.
I'm calling on behalf of Satan and Associates. Please verify your name or the last 4 digits of your social security number so that we can discuss this very important matter.
When the doctor had replied, he sounded more despondent than before Andy had revealed his employer.
Yes,
he said, practically whispering. His demeanor seemed to have done a complete reversal.
You're speaking with Dr. Stanley Morris. Last 4 of my social is 2998.
Mr. Morris,
Andy continued, taking great delight in repeating the phrase now.
I am required by law to let you know that I am a death collector, and this is an attempt to collect a death. This call is being recorded and monitored for quality assurance purposes.
He could hear Dr. Morris gulp over the white noise of the phone line.
Mr. Morris,
Andy repeated, savoring each syllable.
Our client, President for Eternity, Lucifer, has assigned your death for collection in full today.
Silence on the other end of the line. Andy resumed his script.
Are you ready to make your payment?
There was a silence that seemed to last an eternity before Morris finally began his sob story. Andy rolled his eyes, already knowing it would be like every other sob story he had heard today before being hung up on, while account holders uselessly tried to flee the country.
Please.
Whispered Morris, his voice now trembling.
I'm just starting to get to know my son. Our relationship has been so terrible, but things are different now. I have unfinished business.
You are correct, Mr. Morris. You do have unfinished business with my client. Your death is past due.
What happens if I refuse to pay?
He questioned, clearly still terrified.
Refusal to pay is not an option. If we can't resolve this death today, my client will be forced to take further action. Your contract negotiated placement in only the second circle of hell, sir. After today, you begin to enter default. Do you know what the sixth circle of hell is like, sir?
No.
Sir, unless we resolve this issue now, today, you will suffocate in an ocean of boiling human feces for all eternity. Once again, Mr. Morris, are you prepared to make payment in full today?
Andy listened to Morris's bawling incoherently until he could no longer take it.
I need you to make a payment decision now.
Yes.
Morris sobbed.
Yes, you finally got me, you demon, you bastard! You finally got me.
He cried, sounding very hysterical. Ignoring Morris's emotional outburst, Andy continued to do his job.
Mr. Morris, before we end the call to resolve your account, I have a couple more quick questions. Do you have any regrets? I can list up to 2 for our records.
Yes!
Shouted Morris, suddenly angry though still sounding hysterical.
Just one. I regret ever signing that damn contract.
Noted,
said Andy, typing in the only regret that any account holders ever voiced in the field marked regret 1 on his computer.
Anything else? There's room for one more.
No.
Morris replied, his hysteria having rapidly diminished as he accepted his fate.
Thanks for your patience, sir. One last question. How will you be killing yourself today?
Gunshot to the head.
What time can we expect you in hell, sir? Please note that influx appropriate times are between 7 and 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This should give you a few hours to wrap up any unfinished business you may have here on Earth.
I'll do it at 8:59.
Thanks for your cooperation, sir,
said Andy, but Dr. Morris had already hung up. 95% of Americans were registered account holders, meaning they had signed a legal contract with Satan and Associates in regard for the privilege of living on Earth instead of in hell. The other 5% were demonic Americans. They weren't stupid enough to hold accounts with Satan, so they worked for him instead. Andy had always aspired to achieve such a legal status, but he knew that as a human being there was no chance in hell of it ever happening. Dr. Morris's account was the only death that Andy had successfully collected that week. His quota, as with every week, had been to secure 6 souls to be delivered to the underworld voluntarily, i.e., through legal death collection from account holders. Though he frequently found himself collecting large bonuses, 10 to 12 souls per week, made his life pretty easy living, he knew that ultimately death collection was a numbers game. Most deathers would inevitably default on their contracts. Who wanted to commit suicide and go to hell? But about 10 to 15% would offer up their sacrifices with little to no protest. In recent years, Satan's forces have been overworked, and minimizing more extreme collection efforts on the Dark Lord's behalf was accomplished through his grace's more PR-friendly death collection agencies, which operated within a series of laws that existed only to make the industry seem legitimate. The death collection industry was highly profitable for successful collectors and kept the heat of the press off of Satan's backside by conveniently allowing account holders to mercifully kill themselves rather than be viciously torn apart by ravenous beasts from the netherworld. The death collection industry was highly profitable for successful collectors and kept the heat of the press off of Satan's backside by conveniently allowing account holders to mercifully kill themselves rather than be viciously torn apart by ravenous beasts from the netherworld. It was Thursday already and nearing 5 p.m. That left Andy 2 business days to collect 5 deaths. The thought frightened him. Missing quota, especially with such high expectations placed upon him, would not be good for his career or his existence. He could already feel his manager breathing down the back of his neck, though the demon stood at the opposite end of the room, berating a trainee for failing to remember his extension on the transfer system. Visago was his name, and he was known throughout the entire industry as the most results-getting manager residing on the planet Earth. Andy tried not to see or hear the debacle, but Visago's voice seemed to increase tenfold for every collector pretending not to listen.
You ignorant monkey!
The monstrous manager shouted.
It's 4 numbers, idiot! 6, 6, 6, 6. How in heaven did you forget that? How in heaven did you erase even graduate apiary? I should rip your lungs out through your rectum, you spineless, worthless piece of baboon feces! Useless, purposeless! I should kill you right now!
Andy knew the only reason Visago would not do just that to the trainee was because the worker termination quota for the week had already been filled. Pieces of 24 human bodies littered the collection floor, the stink a constant reminder to death collectors to
take control and meet your goals.
Andy desperately wanted to remain outside of the termination queue, so he took the message of the moldering flesh around him to heart. A call flashed on his screen. Her name read Reba McIntyre.
Reba?
Hello?
She answered, and then added,
Who's this?
Is this Reba McIntyre?
Silence on her end. In his remarks, she would be a UIF, unidentified female.
Ma'am, I just need you to verify.
Click. Andy breathed a sigh of annoyance and then looked around the collection floor to see if any others were having luck. Though they were not, it took but a moment for him to realize that 2 very important eyes were locked only on him, those of his manager, Visago. He turned toward his desk and got back on the dialer. Overtime, unpaid of course, had racked him one of the 2 suicides he collected thus far. The second had been confirmed this morning, though nothing would be final until Miss Lacey Dunstan jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge at 8:59 p.m. this evening. He sat outside of Visago's office, sweating like a pig into the manskin leather chair in which he was currently fidgeting. Today was Friday, which meant Andy was waiting for his weekly performance review. Even on the weeks he doubled quota, Visago gave Andy the impression that his head really needed to be torn off. He was not looking forward to what sort of twisted wisdom his demonic manager might impart today. Though he waited only 10 minutes, it felt more like 10 hours. When the door opened to the demon's office, Andy expected the sad man who went in before him to exit. Instead, Visago walked out, covered in the collector's blood and grinning like a gargoyle. Andy's heart tried to jump out of his throat, but he was quick to choke it back down.
Mr. Zemeckis, would you please step into my nightmare?
Without saying a word, Andy pulled himself up from the grip of the chair in which he had been waiting and walked into Visago's office. Tossed into the corner like a broken and forgotten toy was the dismembered corpse of the man who entered the office before him. He noticed the head was missing, but his eyes quickly found it atop a file cabinet, dripping warm blood down the side of the beige metal. He didn't even understand how it could have happened so quietly. While waiting just outside the door, he hadn't even heard the slightest of sounds from within the office, and much less the kind of horrific screaming that might accompany such an evisceration. "I thought we already hit our termination quota for this week," mumbled Andy, terrified.
What was that?
"Nothing, sir," Andy quickly replied.
You aren't going to tell on me, are you?
Questioned the demon. "Tell on you for doing what, sir?" said Andy, pretending not to see the headless corpse in the corner.
For going over the termination quota, monkey!
"No, sir, I didn't even notice the body," Andy lied, sounding quite unconvinced himself. "Your secret's safe with me."
Good, Andy. Good. Have a seat.
Andy quickly moved to the chair across from Visago's death. The demon sat down opposite, his vaguely reptilian eyes searing through what little remained of Andy's soul after his years as a death collector had rotted it away. The demon stared for 2 minutes, not even blinking or breathing, and silently daring Andy to do so himself. He managed to remain breathless and motionless for the duration of the silence, and was grateful when Visago finally began to break his derision.
Zemeckis, we have a problem.
"I know, sir. I'm sorry about my numbers this week. I'll double my quota next week, I swear before Satan."
Silly monkey. The problem isn't your quota. That's someone else's problem now.
Andy didn't like the sound of that. What do you mean? He asked.
Andy, do you know when the term on your contract expires?
Suddenly, Andy found it very hard to breathe.
That's right, Andy. Not for another 3 years, true. But there is a stipulation in your contract that if our office is moved to another location, you are required by law to accompany us. We've invested a lot of training in you. We don't want to lose someone so talented. Our president, His Grace Lucifer, has decided to relocate our office to the center of hell. It's just cheaper for us to work there than in America. Let it sink in.
Andy didn't need to. He already knew what that meant.
Yes, it means you will have to die earlier than negotiated. However, as a fringe benefit of being employed by Satan and Associates, we will make arrangements for your departure from Earth, and you are allowed to enter Hell outside of the influx appropriate time. Are you ready to make payment? Today? Now?
No, sir, Andy stuttered, finding himself unable to speak.
Why not?
Asked Visago. I have unfinished business.
You do have unfinished business. With our client, you can finish it in Hell. I believe your contract negotiated for the third circle. I hear it's pretty nice. There are some truly beautiful gremlins in that part of town. You will just love them. They are so passionate about harvesting human organs and are hell-renowned for their evisceration skills. I need to remind you that default on his contract will put you in the 7th circle. Unless you want to be sodomized and eaten by bipedal crocodile men for eternity, you will agree to make payment in full today.
Andy found himself unable to form a response.
Yes, just nod.
Andy slowly nodded, not even comprehending his imminent transfer to hell in any real sense.
Good. On behalf of Satan and Associates, we would like to thank you for your years of service here on Earth, and welcome you to many more serving the Dark Lord from the bowels of hell. We're talking Circle 1 real estate here. The worst you'll have to deal with are a few birds pecking out your eyes, some talking feces here and there, cannibals. Nothing really to worry about. Do you have any real regrets? I'll make sure to take note of them on your account after you've made payment in full.
Just one, said Andy, the tears welling in his eyes.
What's that?
I regret ever signing that contract, he answered, his voice choked by the large knot in his throat.
Yes,
Visago replied, his voice unbelievably patient.
That's all?
Yes, sir.
Normally, we would ask you how you would be killing yourself today, but as part of your benefits, all arrangements for your influx have already been made.
The demon stood up from his desk. His height seemed to have grown, and leathery red flesh was stretched taut across his bulging, bull-like muscles. He leaned over the desk, baring his jagged yellow teeth.
Don't worry. We'll be professional.